Welcome to CXQA Live, the home of the agent-centric contact center philosophy, where we talk about every week how agents with the right training, tools, and connection with your business are going to be a revenue growth and protection center for your business. They're going to be the best diagnostic tool that you could ever have. They're going to ensure that your customers are satisfied and connected. They're going to produce more and better work, and they're going to want to stay and contribute to the long-term success of your company. Now, along with us again today is Dave Seaton, principal consultant at Seaton CX, who helps B2B companies measure, manage, and improve customer experiences. Now, Dave also has what I like to call a caffeinated CX insight email. It's called CXpresso, and he calls it the weekly email for brave CX leaders who want to score buy-in. And quite frankly, it's really good stuff. But it's really great to have you back on the show, Dave.
Thanks, Rob. It is great to be here once again.
Yeah, man. So I think you've been with us 3 times now. And you always bring a level of not just insight, but emotional intelligence and all the things that really elevate beyond just the metrics, what CX is supposed to be and what it can be. So I love that dynamic is part of how you approach CX and even some of your own growth and sort of journeying along, figuring some of this stuff out. It's a fascinating story, and really lands right where we're gonna spend our time today. And today's topic is one of my personal favorites. We've had one other show that touched on this, and that's empathy in CX interactions. So, making no assumptions and giving ourselves a healthy foundation for the whole conversation. Dave, maybe we should just start with the question, what is empathy?
Yeah, that's an important question, Rob. And the reason is there's a lot of misconceptions out there about empathy. That, empathy is being nice and giving out hugs, that empathy means I have to feel what you feel. Empathy means, I have to accept your values and beliefs, and none of that is true. Empathy, the simplest definition for empathy is understanding what another person is feeling and why. That's it. Understanding what another person is feeling and why. Now, if we dive a little deeper, there's actually 3 different types of empathy. And this is important. I think it's critically important in the contact center discussion because of what we're asking our agents to do. So we'll get there in a minute, but we'll start. The first type of empathy is called cognitive empathy. And that's a really rational understanding of what the other person is feeling and why. The example I like to use, if you're sitting in the airport and your flight is delayed, and a guy gets up and he goes to the gate agent and he starts, yelling at the gate agent. You can use your rational brain. You can say, that guy's angry because his flight was delayed, right? It doesn't require me to feel anger or anything else. It's just a simple, rational understanding of what the other person's feeling and why. The second type of empathy is emotional empathy. And this is where we actually mirror the feelings of the other person. We actually have neurons in our brain called mirror neurons that generate emotions when we see somebody else experiencing emotions. For example, if you watch a movie and something you really connect with the main character and something horrible happens to them and you feel sad because they feel sad, that's your mirror neurons at work. That's emotional empathy. That's the second kind. And the third kind of empathy is called empathetic concern. And that's kind of a combination of the first two. You have the cognitive empathy, you also feel for the other person, and then you are motivated to do something about it, to help if there's a way to help. And that's where you see people engage in acts of altruism, compassion, generosity, is they're motivated by empathetic concern. And so when we think about empathy in the contact center, in a customer support, a customer interaction perspective, I mean, I'll ask you, which one do you think our agents should be engaging in?
Well, I think this is a great question. I would love to take this opportunity to pass the buck and ask maybe our attendees to throw their thoughts in the chat, because we're all in this together, right? We're going to
That's
take this
right.
next level. So, um, guys, if you just answered Dave's question for us in the chat, we would really like that, because I think it's an important question, right? You think about, while you guys are taking a minute to answer, and maybe I'll be fair. Why don't you restate the question for
Sure.
the attendees so that they can make sure they get it right before I fill some time with a question?
Yeah. So which type of empathy do we think it's fair for our to expect our contact center agents to have in their work, in their jobs? Cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, or empathetic concern?
So please just add your thoughts, guys. And I just want to make a quick comment, and that is, in many ways there are helping professions throughout society in general, where they engage in quite a few tragic and difficult scenarios as a regular part of their job, and they often experience what's called empathy fatigue, where they're literally just burned out being empathetic all the time.
Mhm.
And I think the dynamic there is understandable, when you think about somebody in the medical profession, or somebody who helps people with trauma as a psychiatrist or psychologist. They're constantly coming across some of the hardest situations that happen in humanity. And so in some ways this is true for contact center agents.
Mhm.
It might not be a full tragedy like what you see in an ER, or what you see in the funeral industry, for example, or whatever the case may be, but there is empathy fatigue. Now I'm going to pick on you guys because I didn't see any answers come in the chat. But I will go ahead and say I think you've got to have some cognitive empathy. Um, because the goal, right, in any customer experience design is to make a connection between the brand. Hold on, I got one. Cognitive empathy is the most fair to expect. And thanks, Doug, for your answer. And I think that's the real answer you were looking for, Dave, because we're talking about somebody who is engaging all the time with people who have a dissatisfaction, right? So I think we've got our answer from Doug. Cognitive empathy.
Yep, Doug, that's my opinion as well. I'll stress the word opinion is that's all I would expect from contact center agents. Now we hear, great feats of customer service where agents have displayed empathetic concern and they've gone above and beyond to help a customer, and that's awesome. But that would not be my day-to-day expectation. My day-to-day expectation would be, listen for clues, understand the context clues, identify the emotion that the customer is feeling, and then you've got to actually let the customer know that you understand them. Because empathy actually doesn't require me, whoop, here came a poll. Empathy doesn't require me to actually do anything, right? But all humans, including our customers, have an emotional need to receive empathy. And so we need to demonstrate to the customer that we understand, again, what they're feeling and why. But it doesn't require us to accept their values and beliefs, doesn't require us to feel the emotions that they're feeling, just simply to have that cognitive understanding of what they're feeling and why.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say too, um, you know, we're going to talk about a little bit different question next, which is, why is empathy important? And, I don't want to jump ahead in your thoughts, Dave, but we're kind of bridging into that a little bit here, right?
Yeah.
Because the why is it important question has two sides to it, right? If we're expecting more humanity out of our agents than they can afford to give to their daily work on a repetitive basis, then we have another kind of problem, right? we
Right.
we have that empathy fatigue. We have a disconnect between the brand and the employee, as well as between the employee and the customer. And so that, we're talking about why is empathy important next. Maybe you can kind of take us along that path to that question.
Yeah, I believe it's important because humans have an emotional need for empathy. We want to be understood by other people.
Mm,
One of our six basic emotional needs, another that's big in customer service transactions, is respect.
mm,
All human beings have an emotional need to be respected. Often that gets triggered in a customer service interaction, or an experience where the customer experience has let somebody down. Uh, and the benefit of expressing empathy to the customer is that when people are recipients of empathy, they are more likely to engage in pro-social behavior.
mm,
Pro-social behavior is actions and activities that are good for humanity as a whole, not just good for the individual. And so, as a business, if you show empathy to your customers, they're actually more likely to partner with you to solve the problem. I've got an example of this way back in my early career. I was a director over a customer support department. Um, and our customers were business people at hospitals. And so I remember one time I had to handle an escalation. I had to call up a director of IT at a safety net hospital. Now, safety net hospitals they serve an underprivileged population that typically can't afford health care. So they get a lot of government subsidies to be able to serve that population. But it means that they're operating on really, really thin margins. Everybody's doing six jobs. Everybody's stressed out. And this director of IT was no different. And he had, basically a list of grievances against our company. And he wanted to talk to somebody that he could, get it out. And, I typically, back at that point in my career, my typical response in these situations was to rationally explain our policies and procedures and all the reasons that we had done what we had done, and how if he knew what we knew, then he shouldn't be upset about it. And you can imagine how well that typically went over. But with this guy, I'd been studying and learning about emotional intelligence, and I was listening to him and what he'd been through. It sounded really frustrating. And so I just said that. I said, wow, that sounds really frustrating. And he paused. And in that pause, kind of the tension evaporated. And he
mm.
said, yeah, it was. I said, man, yeah, I'd be frustrated too. And that was a turnaround point where I was no longer the enemy, the cause, the source of his frustration, but I was actually somebody who understood him, understood why he was feeling how he was feeling, and maybe could help him. And then through the rest of the call, we partnered on how our two organizations were going to work together, and was able to, come to a mutual agreement. But that instance forever changed how I thought about customer support and it being this human to human interaction.
Yeah, I mean, I love that story for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons that I love that story is because you went from an adversarial relationship with this customer to being in a position where you two could collaborate to create positive outcomes for both organizations, right? And empathy has the power to do that. And that's the point, right? That's why empathy is so important, even in the most non-human business sense, the most human thing, empathy, directly relates to business outcomes. And I think for executives to understand that in order to improve your numbers, you're going to have to get past the numbers is very difficult for many executives. They really just they can't get that connection because they live in reports and metrics, and they live in P&L, and they live in the balance sheet, and they're looking at pure business numbers and trying to improve those business numbers, which is their job, right? And so when you deal with people all day, and your business is people, and it's making the people to people connections that make the business thrive better, you got to look past the numbers a little bit. And this is where empathy is as an easy entry into that type of conversation.
Yeah. And I want to add, it's not just for the negative emotions.
Yeah.
It's not just for customers who are upset because of, or they're afraid that something is going to happen. I mean, what if you get a customer who is excited because they're getting a special present or a special trip for a loved one? Like, to pick up on that and to match their energy and to mirror that back to them, what a great way
Mm.
to improve the customer experience.
Yeah. No, and look, I'm thinking about myself, right? I've had some interactions with customer service agents that were lacking any human connection, but I've had some on both the positive and the negative side that were energy matching engagements, right? Where, I'm excited about doing business with your company, but I'm even more excited now that I'm putting that human connection that I have with you into that, right?
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful, powerful thing.
Yep. Yep.
So,
So
yeah. I mean, I think we've kind of talked in theory, right, about what empathy is in CX and why it's important. Maybe we can get a little bit more tactical and practical here.
how do
And
you do it?
how do you actually demonstrate empathy to a customer, not
Uh,
just as one individual, but as an organization? How do you enculturate and build the space for and the importance for empathy in those customer interactions into your CX organization?
I am all about heuristic models. Now, humans, measured by neuroscientists, have somewhere north of 34,000 different emotions. Okay. Your average English speaking adult knows about 42,000 words. And I guarantee 75% of them are not emotion words. Okay. So we don't even have words for all the emotions that we can experience.
Mm.
And there is no way in even if we did, there's no way in the context of a customer service interaction I can like flip through 34,000 different emotions in my mind and identify which one the customer's feeling and why. So there are a couple different heuristic models out there you can teach your agents. Probably the simplest one is the inside out model from the movie Inside Out, right? You've got joy, sadness, anger, disgust, and fear. The model that I use has six. You got happiness and sadness, they're kind of opposites. I've got fear and anger, they're actually opposites, right? If you think about your fight or flight response.
Mm-hmm.
And then pride and shame is the third set, and they're opposites as well. And within shame, you've got disgust and embarrassment. And, have you ever been embarrassed as a customer because you kind of made a mistake and now you got to call customer service and try and get things right? So that's my model. Happiness, sadness, anger, fear, pride, shame. And within those, there's different degrees, right? So in the spectrum of anger, you might have annoyed, or it might go to frustrated, or it might go to angry, or it might go to livid, right? Within happiness, you might be contented, you might be excited, you might be overjoyed or ecstatic, right? So there's different levels in those. But in the context of a conversation, I think it's really easy to kind of dial into which of the six, right? If their flight was delayed, right? Are they afraid that they're going to miss an important event? And, so we can teach agents these heuristic models that are easy to use in the moment. And it may not be perfectly scientifically accurate, but it's good enough to get the job done. And
Mhm.
so it's quite easy in the moment to identify the emotion that the customer is feeling and why. There's your empathy. And then one of the ways that you demonstrate that empathy is by saying the emotion back to them in an empathy statement. And like, hey, Rob, sounds like you're really concerned that such and such is going to happen. That's understandable. I'd be concerned too. And by saying that emotion, just like I did with that director of IT, when I said, wow, that sounds really frustrating. I didn't even know what I was doing back then, right? But that was an empathy statement. That sounds really frustrating.
Yeah.
And what did it do? It released the tension. And he said, yeah, it was frustrating. And then we got down to business.
I mean, that's like putting a key into a lock, right? You can try all kinds of things to get the lock to unlock, but until you do the thing that it was designed for, it's going to be a brute force experience to get it open, right? And so
Mhm.
in many ways there's all these interesting neuroconnectivity questions, and honestly, as you started that segment, my mind was just exploding with reflections and thinking about the implications upon humanity for what you're saying. And the language versus the language limitations, as compared to the way our emotional selves are built, and all of this. And then when you break it down to the business with a customer and the human that is the interface between the business and the customer, there is on some level the potential for a real human connection that bridges something that's bigger than that customer relationship with the brand, but that can benefit everyone involved, including the agent,
Mhm.
by making that human connection. And I think, this is one of those things that, again, is very difficult to see in pure numbers, but you can see the impact of it in numbers. And
Absolutely.
that ability to um, put in perspective, we see the symptoms of the emotion, but what is really at the core of it, and how can we identify with and connect with, on behalf of the brand that we represent, what that customer is really experiencing, and then work together to solve, what we can together in that customer journey.
Yeah. There's a guy named Chris Voss. He was a top FBI hostage negotiator for a long time. He wrote a book a couple years back called Never Split the Difference, where he walks through the FBI's methods of negotiating with kidnappers, terrorists, hostage takers, bank robbers, etc. And it was all based on his concept that he called tactical empathy. And, he's talking to bank robbers, right? He's not going to accept their values and beliefs in the normal rational society. It does not make sense to go kidnap people, take hostages, do violence, right? But using this concept of empathy, understanding what the criminal was feeling and why, and then saying it back to them, they were able to talk down hostage takers, kidnappers, bank robbers, etc. He tells a story in the book where there's this standoff in a high-rise apartment, and they're in the hall just talking for hours to the criminals on the other side of the door, and they're saying these empathy statements. It sounds like you're afraid if you open the door, you're going to get shot. And after hours of this, the criminals actually surrendered peacefully because they built rapport with the hostage negotiators. And while hopefully we would never be in a hostage negotiation situation on a customer service call, it shows the power of this cognitive empathy, understanding what the other person's feeling and why, and then mirroring it back to them.
It's really powerful stuff. And I will say Chris Voss has some really great video and audio content out as well, based off of that experience of figuring out how to connect genuinely with the criminals he's trying to prevent from hurting society. Very, very fascinating. But we don't have a lot of time left today because we try to honor our half an hour. And as usual, Dave, we've gone around the globe a couple times and said some really great things. And I'd like to offer our guests any opportunity to add any questions or comments before we close out. But this is something that's interesting to think about at scale, isn't it?
Yes.
Because most CX organizations are in a position where they're trying to create a scaled up customer experience using humans on both sides as the customer and the engagement with the customer. And that presents some challenges to do human things at scale. Really, no matter what the human thing is you're trying to do at scale, there are additional variables, right? So maybe you could give us just a little bit of insight before we close out our time on what those dynamics can look like for a CX organization.
One of my favorite things to do to develop this and practice this in your team is in a team meeting or something, pull a YouTube clip of some scene from a movie, sitcom, whatever. Watch the scene and then name the emotions that each of the actors was demonstrating in that scene. You can do it from Star Wars, you can do it from Friends. Doesn't have to take a long time, but that exercise of naming the emotions helps develop our social awareness, which is one of the 4 emotional intelligence domains. Don't have time to get into that, but it's a great exercise. Doesn't take a long time, and then you can have a conversation about the emotions that you've identified. Well, why did you think that was anger? Was that really fear? Is that person happy? Is it right? And those conversations build our skill to be able to do that in the moment with a customer.
It's really good stuff. I feel like we need to have more episodes on these kinds of things, because they're difficult to see financial and business value in unless you understand the connection between these things that almost can't be measured per se and the business outcomes upon which all businesses are judged.
Yep.
And so, as always, I'm really grateful to have you with us, Dave, but I'm grateful for the way that you bring this dynamic to your work and to your broader investments in the CX space. And I'm always grateful to be able to have you on the show, man.
Yeah, it's been great to be here. I've actually got a resource on my website, 37 empathy statements based on emotional intelligence. Can drop the link in the chat.
I'm already ahead of you.
Awesome. There you
And, I,
go.
and I'd like to drop in the link for CXpresso as well,
Cool.
because, I really think I get value out of it every time it comes out. It's one of the things I look forward to in my own professional development in CX. And I say that not because you're on the show. I throw the link out for CXpresso to a lot of people in LinkedIn messages. But as I said, I'm grateful for you being on the show, but I'm grateful for the way that you invest into the broader CX world. And I can't wait for us to do this again soon.
Yeah, me too.
All right, everyone. Hope everybody has a great Tuesday. Go make a difference in your world. Take care.